Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Rise About Justice Movement podcast. My name is Zachary Mallory, and I am the host and the founder of the Rise About Justice Movement and the Rise About Justice Movement, the podcast. Today, I will give a viewer discretion is advised due to the nature of the topics that we will be discussing. Today, I am joined by one of my favorite humans, Jax. Jax, welcome to the Rise About Justice Movement podcast.
Thank you so much, Zachary. Really happy to be here.
Yeah, it's been a long time coming. It's been a long time in the works. Rescheduling and scheduling conflicts on both ends have been incredibly challenging, but here we are finally. And I'm so honored and so excited to sit down and talk with you and talk about these topics today because they're very hard hitting. So, without further ado, feel free to introduce yourself and let us know about the work that you do and what inspires you to get involved.
Absolutely. Well, I will say you're also one of my favorite humans because the work y'all are doing right now at Rise Above Justice Movement is just incredible, and to watch you all, grow over so many months has been incredible. So, just honestly honored to be on the podcast. And yeah, I'll jump in. So I'm Jax or Jackie. My pronouns are they, them. So yes, I am non-binary, despite what, the current tyrant in the White House is saying. We definitely exist, and just as the trans community has always existed, and I think that's something that really just, grateful to be on a podcast here where there's just incredible, work that people are doing. And I was born in Massachusetts, but I moved, every 6 months to 2 years since I was young. So I've lived kind of up and down the East Coast, parts of the South and the West Coast, and now I'm living in the Midwest in Louisville, Kentucky. And so, yeah, I would say that has given me a very full picture of the United States, especially organizing across the country. And, from I would say 19 on, I'm 30 now. I also had the opportunity to visit and backpack and live in over 30 countries as well. So, also have a really good understanding of, the global perspective on the United States. And so, especially right now, there's so much that, my both my background and my childhood, this work is really affecting me in a lot of different areas. So, I've been kind of on my own since I was 16, and during that, I was actively engaged, basically 15 on in activism, organizing, abolition work. And a lot of this really focused around fighting white supremacy. And that was, I was doing that even before I knew what the term was, and much about it. And so I got into this work, because of my childhood in a lot of ways. And I will say, I am a child survivor of MAGA parents, and that's something that I would love to also explain more because I know there are so many people out there, especially in this country, that have had similar experiences, and maybe don't know how to talk about it or how to understand it fully. And so I really got into this work because of that. And I grew up really, really poor. I had five siblings, and we never really had enough food, and with everything going on with SNAP benefits now, that was a huge way that me and my siblings were even able to survive and have food. And so much of what's happening is also having very much a personal effect on me, and I know many, many others who were able to kind of survive and somehow make it and be able to get an education and be able to understand right now really why so much of what this administration is doing is just incredibly corrupt. And in a lot of ways, so much of that is also because I went on a deep dive from a young age, understanding, why were my parents like this? Why did I not, maybe see the signs even younger? And neither of my parents went to college. My birth father was in construction work, so he was, one of those guys that would go out to Home Depot to find work. And it was never very consistent. And yeah, my birth mother also didn't work until later in life. So something that I found early on was like neither of my parents' families were very religious. Like they didn't grow up religious. And so something that I always try to explain to people in this country when they're trying to understand white Christian nationalism is that, my parents met in the 80s. And during that time, that was when, the US saw a incredible rise in white Christian nationalism as like a political force. So in a lot of ways, kind of what, happened during that time as a young child, I was able to then, go back later in life and really dive deep into why, these things were happening. And so much of that movement was because of the 60s and the 70s, because of the civil rights movement. And, so many white Americans, but also just, people in this country that were, you know, so focused on this religious aspect, really got into, this, and I'll say it in quotes, but evangelical Christian kind of ideology that, in so many ways, was able to mask white Christian nationalism. And so obviously we're seeing that, front and center in so many ways right now in the country because they've been just so emboldened by, this administration. And so, neither, my parents tried to also homeschool us. So much of what's happening right now in the country around, you know, um, you know, talking about how vaccines are, no one should get vaccinated and no one should, their kids shouldn't go to college and all these kind of ideas and things that are coming out of both the administration, but also, this very white supremacist culture, was kind of what I was raised around. So, I wasn't encouraged to go to college. I was encouraged to, go, be in the church, or I was encouraged to, not, basically not really educate myself, right? And not be able to know what is really going on. And so, my parents tried to homeschool me. I was homeschooled from kindergarten to third grade. And, a lot of that wasn't even real homeschooling. It was, books on religious books and texts and also just I was not able to read for a long time as a kid too. That took me more time than average, I would say it would take them. So now kind of seeing where I am in my life, I'm always just so amazed that I was lucky enough to kind of make it out of that environment. And so yeah, the state kind of forced my parents to put us back, put me in school in fourth grade. And during that time, I was like in a tiny, tiny town in South Carolina of like 200 people and a very conservative area. And I just remember, just starting to see so much of the racism up front. If that was both, at school or where I was living. And so it was a very eye-opening, experience from a young age. And I would say that something that I hope more people would understand, and also those that come from this background, is, do your research. As you get older, just start to investigate why, things are the way they are and why there's such a negative connotation on things like vaccinations, which are just, critical for our health. Like I couldn't get vaccinated till I was 18 because of my parents, because I didn't have, consent. And it was definitely something that throughout my life I've just thought a lot about. And especially now, so much of my activism and organizing has been focused on just trying to make it easier for kids growing up, to be able to have access to what they need. And so much of that now is like just so scary to see that it feels like in so many ways we're going backwards. And so yeah, I would say that's kind of a lot of the reasoning, I guess, behind, why I got into organizing and activism at a young age. Just because it was directly both affecting my life and just seeing that through my parents too. And I think, being in poverty at a young age, and making it out, there's so much that you learn through that experience, so much that you see. And so, yeah, I would love to see more people that come from the background that I do, speaking out and voicing just how horrible the not only MAGA, right? MAGA, it wasn't even around when I was younger, so I would even say like I see the word, MAGA is the same to me as white Christian nationalism or white supremacy. It's all coming from, the same root causes of really colonialism, but just the just specifically in this country, it's very rooted in just a long, long history of racism. And in a lot of ways, right now we're seeing, so much pushback and also So much, people being emboldened by seeing others coming out, speaking out, and with what we're seeing with ICE raids as well, it's just we are seeing, I think, the downfall of like empathy. I think so much of not downfall, but I will say like um, uh, in so many ways, it's seen as like a negative thing to have empathy for your fellow humans, and I think that's just something that I've really, I think the last couple years have really tried to hold on to as much as I could. And I think a lot of us have been trying to do that as organizers because of just the world we're finding ourselves in right now in this country. Um, but yeah, I'll stop there. But that's a lot of kind of the background. I'd love to hear if there's anything you have questions about or yeah, happy to kind of jump into some of my organizing and activism background too.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, let's dive in and talk to, or talk to the point about what free speech looks like, because we have a thing called the US Constitution and the First Amendment. However, meta platforms would have to disagree with that. And then the Supreme Court classifies hate speech as free speech. So let's dive in and talk about your work with free speech for people and the work that you do in that area.
Absolutely. So I am currently the digital organizing strategist at Free Speech for People. I've been with them for about a year now. And they are, we are a national legal nonprofit. And we actually came out of, we were formed 15 years ago after the Citizens United case that, many know about. But the idea of even our name, Free Speech for People, was really, free speech for people over corporations, right? Because of what we're seeing, big money in politics and its grasp it has had on our country, and still does. And so this organization really came out of that idea and that principle of, corporations shouldn't act as people. They shouldn't have First Amendment rights, and that's something that I really want more people to try to get in and understand. I think that's something that even at the legal side of things, there can be a lot of legal jargon and maybe misunderstanding of some of that work. But I've found, in the last few years that there's a special, place I think for organizers and lawyers and legal experts to really be in coalition and partnership right now in trying to combat a lot of what we're seeing at the national level. And so I'll jump into some of the work that we're currently doing. So we are working on a campaign for abolishing super PACs. So if a lot of people will know of a PAC, but there's also many other super PACs, and we saw even just this last election with Cori Bush and Jamal Bowman, we saw how super PACs just have a crazy amount of power to sway our politics, and so. I'm really, really grateful to work on this campaign, and we are working on that with Representative Summer Lee in Pennsylvania. And so, yeah, if you want to get involved, if anyone wants to get involved in that campaign, you can go to abolishingsuperpacs.org and learn more. There's so many ways to get involved in that campaign. Another issue that we're working on is around abolishing ICE as well. That's a lot of our work that we've been doing at the campaign level has been working on specific cases. So some of the kidnapping cases around Rumesa Ozturk and Abrego Garcia and others has also been, the legal front of what we've been working on as well. Also, I think many people know that we're also leading the Impeach Trump Again. And also, impeaching and removing other key officials in the administration. And we're working with Representative Al Green of Texas on that. And that has, been going on since Trump's first day in office. So this campaign has been ongoing for the last, 10 months now. And it's, also been an incredible opportunity to just meet a lot of people that have, many different areas of issues that they want to fight and work on. And so this has been one where it's very intersectional in a lot of ways. And so we have currently over 1 million people who have signed that petition, and we're just continuing to try to get the word out. We've been involved in all of the No Kings protests. We've been working with 5051 and indivisible groups across the country, as well as other, grassroots organizations. And it's just been a massive undertaking, but also incredible opportunity to see people getting involved in a big way. And in another, I'll say another campaign and issue work that we are doing is around getting multinational foreign influence corporations out of politics. So that's, like Amazon, companies like Amazon getting big money out of politics is something that we all know is a huge, huge problem in this country and is only getting worse. And so I'm working on multiple campaigns at the state level on that issue with our team. We're also working, and we've also endorsed the Epstein Transparency Act that Representative Rokana and Thomas Massey introduced. And so we are definitely for releasing the Epstein files and have been, really pushing to just get as much awareness around it as possible. We, also are working on a Trump extortions campaign as well, which is various cases around specific states where Trump, has unlawfully, just had many ways that he's hurt a lot of legal organizations because of the stances and work that they do. And so, there are kind of many more, but I will say these are some of the main campaigns that we're working on, and each of them in their own way is robust and has a strong community of both our stakeholders, but also just volunteers that have gotten involved in the campaign. So yeah, we're working on some major campaigns, and I will say before kind of this year that I think Free Speech for People in a lot of ways, because it's a legal organization and because it's focused on the democracy space, it can be hard to get people to get involved in this work. I think sometimes that's because of just the nature of legal work and maybe just not understanding some of the cases or what we do or why we do it. And also just the idea around like reimagining what democracy could look like. I think in a lot of ways, being someone who works as, an organizer and activist, but also as an abolitionist, I definitely see how even people that would hear about the Impeach Trump Again campaign are probably like, well, who's leading that and what's it about? And how are you, how is the campaign working and who's involved? And so in a lot of ways, I think that that's something that I get really excited about when people are curious and they want to know more because this is a campaign for everyone. I really do believe that. We saw with No Kings that so many people are coming out to the streets for various reasons, different issues that they care about. But something that I've really focused on with my work and my background has been on the intersectionality of our movements. And so it's also really incredible to see also how so many of these campaigns overlap. And right now in this country, just how pertinent so many of these issues are, especially around big money in politics. We're seeing that constantly. So yeah, I would say that those are some of the bigger ways that you can get involved with the Impeach Trump Again campaign. You can go to impeachtrumpagain.org, where you can find actually all of the 25 grounds for impeachment that our incredible legal scholars have outlined in detail. And so in many of those 25, there's multiple in each one of those. So it's many more than you would expect. So I really encourage those that can to read through those articles of impeachment and understand why the campaign is happening and why we're here today and pushing for it. And so, over 1 million Americans have signed the petition, and we're really just trying to get the word out. In so many ways, it's hard without mainstream media. So we're doing everything we can to work with a lot of grassroots organizations and really just getting at the local level to get people to know about the campaign for one, but also to understand, the reasons behind it, and that he has a growing list of impeachable offenses that, no, we haven't seen with any other president. And so it really just shows us how much he's, been able to get away with. And also, we need courage right now. We need Congress to be courageous enough and brave enough to really, vote for impeachment in the next vote, on June 24th. 2025, we saw the first vote that Al Green presented for impeachment, and only 79 members of Congress voted for it. And so, a lot of what we're saying is, we need our members of Congress to do their job, to focus on their oath of office and really, do more to hold this, tyrant accountable. Because if they don't, the people will. And I think in a lot of ways, this campaign shows that we are showing that at the end of the day, we the people is strong, and we're stronger than I think many know. And seeing that over 7 million of us came out on No Kings, and the protests are growing each time we have, a national one. It's just continuing to grow. And yeah, one thing I'll say too that we really focus on too is the 3.5% mark that is around, having 3.5% of a population in a country pushing back against Trump and this administration. It really shows it, and historically shows that the people have the power. So we really are trying to get to that, and that would be a little under 12 million in the country, pushing for his impeachment, but also just against what this administration has been doing since taking office. So we are doing a lot of work in these areas, but would be like happy to talk through each one of them. I know some of it is maybe also difficult to understand, and as I'm not a lawyer myself, so I definitely try to simplify this work as much as possible, because I know so many people in the country are, against big money in politics, are against super PACs, are, want the Epstein files released, and also, want, to abolish ICE and everything that they're doing, and also the National Guard, and it's how the president is using that to just attack so many cities, and we're just seeing an incredible, I think, also lack of Congress really taking initiative. So we hope that people will get involved in the campaigns more. You can check out our website at freespeechforpeople.org, where you can find all of the campaigns and issues that we're working on. But there's quite a bit. So would be happy to discuss more too if you have any questions specifically about any of them.
You know, I think I think you hit it on the nail whenever you talk about a lot of the issues that our communities are facing. You know, as I've been very public with, my mom is currently in a battle with cancer. So she was diagnosed with stage 3 cervical cancer in April of this year, and then she underwent a lot of internal radiation, external radiation, chemotherapy, and we've been constantly battling with the state of Missouri over her Medicaid. And it's been a tumultuous time. And thinking about what's happening now, she was completely cut from her food stamps. And, obviously Medicaid is at risk. And obviously, SSI is at risk, because I did see that Trump decided to go ahead and just throw it all out there that they were trying to end these programs because they're quote unquote Democrat ran and quote unquote Democrat programs, but these aren't really a Democratic or Republican program. These are literally programs that help children, that help the elderly, that help the poor, that help the disabled. There should be no party affiliation whenever it comes to food stamps. I mean, food doesn't discriminate if you're a Democrat or Republican or whatever. Like, it doesn't discriminate. So it's just like, I don't know. But just know that we at the Rise of Justice Movement are in full support of everything that you are doing, everything that your coalition of people are doing to push back. Just know that we're in full support of that. Obviously, we want to continue collaborating and continue uplifting it and doing it even more so. So we can obviously talk offline about that, because there's a lot of ideas that I have too. But diving in and talking about, the collaborative pieces that you're collaborating with 5051 movement, which we also collaborate with quite a bit. We amplify a lot of their work. They amplify a lot of ours. So we go back and forth. But What are you seeing in terms of like social media and like censorship of the work that you're doing?
Yeah, great question. As a digital organizing strategist, I think that that is something right now in 2025. Anyone that works in the digital space knows how just incredibly difficult it is to get out, anything that's, in any way seen as political, right? So what you just talked about with your mom and SNAP benefits, I think that that is kind of why I wanted to talk about my childhood up front because I want people to understand that this is they're attacking children. Like these are our programs to support, those that need just basic, food and healthcare. And, it's wild to me that we're, in this place where there's just such a lack of empathy that we can't even see that. And like you said, it isn't about party. Our organization is nonpartisan and in a lot of ways. I don't see myself kind of in either of those buckets of Republican or Democrat. And so, doing this work, a lot of people are always saying, "Oh, well, you must be working in politics." And I'm like, "No, these are human rights and social justice issues. This is liberation work. This is not about a party, And when it comes to digital space, that is something that we're seeing more and more is just so much censorship. I know with our Free Speech for People TikTok account, we were able to grow to nearly 50,000 followers, but even just now and recently, so many of our videos are getting flagged and not getting pushed out there through the algorithm. And so, we're seeing it. We're seeing it happen real time. Same in a lot of ways with like other platforms. And I think just something that we think a lot about, especially when it comes to strategy, is, being an organizer and activist in this time, especially digitally, you can't just think about, getting the word out. You have to think about the strategy behind how you're doing that. And so, in a lot of ways, one thing that I try to always think about too is, making this more about, day-to-day life, making this about our lives, making it, not just about a specific bill or legislation or maybe even just a campaign, but about that this work is affecting us directly. And so you can do that in a lot of ways. You can do that in creative ways. I think one thing that I'll say for a lot of the digital creators out there that they probably already know is that creativity right now is our superpower. If we can really hone in on, focusing on even using comedy and satire and using like pop culture references and things like that, I found has been able to be a lot more successful in getting the word out because right now people are incredibly burnt out. I mean, I will say, I feel like I've been, organizing now nonstop since October 7th, working on issues around Palestine. And so a lot of people, that's also where they're at. There's so much burnout. And I think in a lot of ways, we have to lean into community. And I think by doing that digitally, it's getting creative, getting to understand our audiences. But yeah, I will say with the censorship, one thing that has been, I think, helpful for all of us in a lot of ways has just been the efforts to collaborate more freely, even with some of our work that may not look like it. It overlaps or intersects, but it does. I think that that is what's been so incredible. I think so many of the connections and organizing, other organizers that I've had connections to over so many years is the reason that we're able to do this because we've created trusted relationships. And I do think it comes from trust at the end of the day because this work, and what we're doing, there's so much of it is rooted in how we interact with one another, how we put out information that is accessible. That's something that I've been really, really focused on in this work. The reason that I got into comms and digital work from my background was because, I came from a low-income background. I came from communities and still do where, we know that the average reading level in the United States is like a fifth grade reading level. We have to really be realistic with what, we are up against in this country and utilize and be strategic in ways that get the word out in very accessible ways. I've never been one to like how legal jargon or, just the inaccessibility of a lot of the work around human rights or social justice, how it can be inaccessible to a lot of people that maybe didn't go to college or didn't focus on these issues. And so, one of the biggest things too is just making the work accessible and understandable to a wide range of audiences and not assuming that everyone knows what you know. And so I think that's where it comes from. I always say, especially working in fighting white supremacy for now, like almost 15 years, one thing I always will say to like, especially white people who are in this work is like, you're never done, you're never finished learning. And I think when you start to realize that and that the fight just continues and it's really about educating yourself, you then realize, when you're trying to spread the word and teach others about this work and get them involved, you are more understanding. You realize, okay, we all have our kind of timeline of when we are able to get this information and what you do from it from there is what it's all about. But activism and organizing is a long-term advocacy. It's not a one-time event or going to one protest. It's definitely much more than that. So I think from the digital side, you can just see how the long-term relationship building with, I've just been grateful to be able to work with organizers across the country. So because of that, in so many ways, I've been able to utilize those connections and those coalitions that I've been able to build over so many years. And so much of that is because of, my work on Palestine or other issues that, I think some people need to understand that this work is very much intersectional. And to see that and to realize that, a lot of our fights are focused on building out the understanding of how we are aligned in so many ways or not aligned, but getting to a point where we really understand how our issues, do overlap and they do intersect. So digitally, I will say one of the biggest things has just been, working with groups like 5051 when they started was around the similar time that our campaign for impeachment started, and it's just really incredible to work with a variety of the state groups and also the national 5051 and watching them grow over these months and this year has also been something that we have really been grateful to be a part of. Right now, we're getting to work with 5051 Houston on a local campaign effort for impeachment there. So it really just allows us to be able to be at the grassroots level in a way that I think a lot of other national nonprofits aren't always good at doing. And so I think because our organization is a bit smaller, and a lot of us come from a grassroots background, it's just been incredible to be able to work with a lot of grassroots partners and in a lot of ways push, members of Congress in each of those states and those districts where people didn't vote for Trump's impeachment, and just showing them that so many of their constituents are for impeachment, and that is about showing the people power. And doing that digitally can have a lot of benefits. We've had a lot of success in our constituents that have worked with us on this campaign, putting out statements on social media, pushing the members of Congress to support impeachment, and a lot of them heard back from their members of Congress because in a lot of ways social media puts pressure on members of Congress, but politicians in general to basically do their job when they're not. Not always, but in a lot of ways, it can be a very impactful way of getting the word out, but also showing them that their constituents in their area, asking them why they aren't supporting something that many of their constituents are. So yeah, I would say in a lot of ways, the digital space, there's so much I feel like you can get into as far as the benefits of it in working in social movements, especially, looking at like global intersectional movements. That's something that is so incredible about the digital space is that when you're organizing, at the local level, there's only so many people that you can reach, right? And now we're seeing with just the rise in the digital space that we're able to like work with people across the world that are working on similar issues and getting to hear what worked for them, what didn't work for them, and be able to even have strategic, brainstorms and conversations about how we can support each other's work more. So I would say at the root of everything, I think with my work has been about amplifying organizations, especially grassroots organizations that don't only always have like the maybe the budget or the resources to be as well known as maybe some of the bigger organizations. And I will say that's something that I think has long term been a huge part of my organizing effort digitally. That has allowed, me to kind of also see what works and what doesn't work digitally and what are people wanting to get involved in. I think as well, it also depends on the climate you're in at the time, what the issues are at the time. But right now, I will say, free speech for people. There is, this past year, there's been basically just a huge uptick in people getting involved in our organization, and so. A huge thing I think that a reason that is because we really focus on corruption in government, and we are seeing some of the worst corruption in government maybe ever in this country. And so I just think being able to know what organizations are out there, amplifying their work. There's so many that are doing incredible work that sometimes just doesn't get noticed or known. So I will say, as personally as an activist and organizer, that's something that I just am really passionate about. Is just basically being a hype man for organizations that deserve it and that should be known, but maybe aren't because of just the way that the algorithm pushes out content digitally. And what, who gets more attention than others. So I'll say that's a lot of the background and reason why, but yeah, happy to elaborate more if needed.
I think you described it in a very, very good way, and I can tell that you've been doing this work for probably as long as I have been doing it as well. I think you mentioned about 15 years. And I think whenever we did your pre-interview, we both realized that we kind of started around like the same time. And, over the time, I asked myself, why in the hell did I ever get involved in doing this work? And there have been times that I've been asking myself that pretty regularly. There's been times that I have wanted to take a step back, but something just keeps me coming back. And I think it's because people like you that bring the energy to these movements and to these advocacy spaces. So first of all, thank you for everything that you're doing, continue to do. And it doesn't go unnoticed. Like you said, a million people have signed this, and I am one of those million people that have signed this because I firmly believe in the work that you were doing. And what's next? So what is next for free speech for people? And then I know you mentioned about some of the projects that you guys are currently working on. So, continue like elaborating on that. But, and then actually, you know what? Before that, let's jump into talking more about like your upbringing and like your parents. So, if you're okay with that, first of all, because I think you mentioned earlier about kind of like elaborating on it a little bit, if you remember right.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm happy to get into that. Are there any like specific questions you think that we want to get into?
I don't have any like specific questions. I think just giving like the overview of what that was like for you, like what you were taught
Yeah.
and what you grew up around, what you heard, what you saw, and just kind of like give a perspective into that. Because I think that's going to resonate with a lot of our followers specifically.
Absolutely. I mean, I think that's honestly why I was like, oh, I would love to do this podcast because I'm not a well-known organizer. I'm not someone who, I have been doing this for work for a long time, but I've been on the back end. I've been, working digitally, and that is what I'm passionate about because I know that there's so many incredible organizers and activists, long-term activists that have been doing this work. Many that are Black, Brown, and Indigenous who've been doing this work many, many more years than I have, and in many ways are the reason that I am here today. So I will say that that is kind of the reason that probably pre Trump's last election win, I would say that that is, where a lot of my work has been. But, at the now with everything going on, I just felt like there was so much importance in, you know, just basically bringing to light the truth of MAGA, of what it stands for. And it's not just about MAGA. It's so much about just like deep rooted white supremacy in this country. And so like as a kid, obviously I didn't know everything yet. I was still learning so much of what I was taught and told. There was like, so much of wanting to keep what was happening, in our culture kind of away from our upbringing. So just simple things like, we didn't have TV. We couldn't watch TV. We couldn't watch normal movies. We had to watch very like religious based movies. And this was many, many years in my childhood where I would have to like hide if I wanted to read a book or watch a show that wasn't and had to kind of hide that that curiosity and that trying to understand why, the whys behind a lot of why I was taught and told to be this way and that this was the right way to be. And, both my parents, they got, like I said, they got into white Christian nationalism in the 80s. And I would love for more people to understand just the timeline of how in this country that was, a really big rise in white Christian nationalism that in a lot of ways went unnoticed by a lot of people, but is very much the reason I think we are where we are today. Like why there is so much emboldened, people just being able to be as racist and as violent as they want to be because they're the culture around white Christian nationalism, but white supremacy in general, is just a very violent. But a lot of people that grow up in it, they don't see anything else necessarily. And so, even things as simple as being homeschooled by two parents that didn't actually teach us anything. They just put a religious text in front of us and told us to read it or to work on it. And so much of that time, I was born in 95, so I know a lot of the rules around kids being in school and things have changed state by state. But that's also something I saw, like moving so much around to different states. There were states where I felt like there was a lot more protections for children than others. And so, being able to see the differences state by state also taught me, okay, this isn't right. This isn't, where I'm not being told the full picture here. And so in a lot of ways, like I said about vaccinations, my parents were very much anti-vaxxers. They very much believe still to this day that vaccines are like we've seen with RFK. They believe a lot of what he pushes out there, the narratives that he pushes out there, which are we just know aren't factual. But when you push out lies and misinformation so much, especially at a national, in large scale, there's especially around, pushing on using white supremacy as a way and a tool to utilize that has, I think, in a lot of ways, just clouded so many people's judgment and understanding. I think a lot of it also has to do with not just taking accountability when it comes to, the rights of children in this country. I think we do a really bad job at that. I wish more people understood how dangerous it can be for children being raised in this country when, there aren't protections available. So, for instance, when we're talking about SNAP benefits now, I've been getting so just angry like about this because that was the reason that like me and my siblings survived. There were so many times and my parents were always very much like against SNAP because of all the reasons that we are seeing with this administration. But at the same time, there were many times when they had to use them. And if we didn't, our fridge was empty. And I remember just like even as a kid seeing like my younger brothers who when they wouldn't eat, you could like literally see their bones. They were so skinny. And that is something that I do think about those things to this day. I think about how it's not just about my family. I'm one person. This is happening to many, many other children. And I really want to focus on the children aspect because you don't have the rights to be able to make decisions. For instance, getting vaccinated, the fact that I had to beg and wasn't able to get vaccinated until I was 18 and legally able to make that decision for myself. Anything could have happened if I was exposed to, to any like anything that my health could have been in jeopardy. And so thinking about that too, it's a very dangerous you know, country to live in right now as a child. It always has in many ways, but it's something that I think about quite often. And I just, I wish more people would start to try to understand it. And, I think about too my my father, he was, very much a construction painter, kind of odd jobs wherever he could get them. But in so many ways, he was out there with many, Black and brown communities, that are fighting just to survive. But he would also lean into the ideas around, oh, they're taking all of our jobs, and but he was white and poor, and he also was struggling to make it. But because of white supremacy and what this country has taught people, one thing I saw a lot from my parents was that they felt like they deserved more because they were white. And that's something that I think is at the root cause of so much of this is that, growing up in poverty and being white in this country, so much of this country tells you if you're white, you deserve so much more, right? You are born with this right to have and to it's just something that I've thought a lot about because my parents have both, I think, used that in many ways to kind of complain about their circumstances and blame it on Black and brown communities instead of, on the issues around like our country making decisions and policies that affect those who grow up in low income communities. And in so many ways, I think that that's just um, manipulated and the ideas around it are distorted because people in power, especially those that have big money and want to have that control, they push out these false narratives to communities that maybe are educated enough to understand who are also white and see themselves as being able to deserve something and blaming those that are non-white for their circumstances. And so in so many ways, not only the Trump administration, but just the ideas around MAGA, the ideas around white Christian nationalism and white supremacy. It's very much in my view, from what I've studied and now worked on for so many years, is that it really is like a cult in so many ways. And I definitely could get into all those reasons at another time, but I just want people to understand that because it happens at the micro level, family by family or, child by child. But this is because of systematic issues within our country. And, something that my therapist will say to me all the time. She's like, it's incredible that you survived, right? And that you made it to where you are. But in so many ways, she's like, oh, in a lot of ways, you should probably either be dead or in prison for what, you went through as a child. But because I'm white, there's so many reasons why, I made it out. And so that's something I also really, really like encourage more people to think about and to understand is, um, it's this kind of like rhetoric around you know, white supremacy in this country, and especially now it being so emboldened. I have worked in this field for a long time, so I wasn't surprised, right, when he won, but so many white people were. And so I think one thing that I think a lot about is I say when I was a child, I had to, deal with a lot of like MAGA conservatives. But as an adult in my career, I've had to also, be combating a lot of like white liberals because there is a lack of understanding in a lot of ways of, what is being, what MAGA is, what their strategies are. I think in a lot of ways, people don't know how to, keep Trump accountable, for instance, and people like him because they don't fully understand. And that's something that I really try to talk about this as much as possible because more people just need to know. They need to know that it's happening across the country, and in different ways to different communities. But yeah, I would love for more people to understand that these are ideas that have very much been a part of a larger um, colonial legacy of wanting this country to be for white people and white people only. And so it's something I think sometimes, people don't want to address, or I think about 2020 a lot. I think about, I started getting involved in BLM back in 2014, when I was in the Bay Area. One of my professors was one of the co-founders. And during that time being involved, I just saw so much more of the deep-rooted racism that not only like was happening between in different places I was in or in different issues, but just systematically what we've seen. And so actually a lot of my organizing background started on like the abolition of prisons. So that is, definitely an area that we're seeing continuously even now, where it is just another way to lock up predominantly Black and Brown Indigenous communities across the country to not have to address the violent nature of, um, the legacies of white supremacy in this country. And I think a lot about other countries too. I think about, countries that have addressed the violence that has happened in the past. And I think about Germany or others. And, one big thing that I wish we would think more about, even historically, is what we're teaching our children, learning early on about what really the legacies of colonialism has done in this country. But now, we're seeing with this administration, we're crazy amounts of attacks on the Department of Education and on teachers and on learning. And that is the reason, and I will say, like, education is power. It's how we are able to not only teach each other and understand and learn about, the issues, but also to not repeat them. And I think that that's something that our country's never been good at. We don't address, our issues straight on, especially when it comes to white supremacy. We just don't want to address it. We don't want to talk about it. And so, yeah, I will say so much of the reason that I do the work I do is because of this. I think back on times when, my parents would just say just awful things about other communities that weren't white because they just didn't. They have this idea in their mind, and it's crazy because so many people will just have the kind of same language that's kind of ingrained in them. That's why I say a lot of it is, very similar to cult-like mentality. And so, yeah, it's crazy to think back on that. It's also crazy to think about my five other siblings. Many of them just never learned, never got out of that environment. And so, I remember even back, before the election, I always reach out to my siblings during the election time just to try my best to try to educate them. And yeah, they all voted for Trump, I learned later on. And even when me pushing to try to explain to them that it not only affected me as their sibling, but also telling them what it would do, and still they voted for him. And so I think that we have to, as a larger concept, we have to understand that there are some people that are just like far gone in this mentality, and we have to do our best to try to change the system so that children and kids in the future, that maybe have a similar experience to me, may be born into from parents that are honestly white supremacists and poor. How do you get out of that? How do you figure out how to educate yourself? And something that I think about too, especially right now, an organization I really love, Harriet's Wildest Dreams. I love the work that they do, but I think back a lot on my first time I ever went to Washington, D.C. was when I was in fourth grade. And I came across a book on Harriet Tubman, and I knew about her previously from school, but I hadn't like deep dived into the work. And I remember just sitting in DC when we were on a class school trip and just reading this book constantly because I knew I couldn't pay for it. And then one of my teachers ended up getting it for me. And I remember coming home and I would have that book like under my pillow every night and I would like read it in the dark, like as much, as much as I could before I had to hide it again. And so that's the kind of stuff that I think I want people to understand is that it's a very, for me, I also grew up in a very abusive and traumatic household. So, even the ideas around the Epstein files, like what's happening with the Epstein files and the fact that, they still won't release them. A lot of, white supremacist culture is also around the idea of like a very traditional idea of a family unit, and also that, men can also do whatever they want. I will say my own father like sexually abused me and my sisters, and that's something that I now will say it openly and I can talk about this, almost like it's a different life because it feels like it was a different time and it was a different life. But in so many ways, I talk about this because I know it's happening to other people right now. I know it's has happened and is continuing to happen. And no one's talking about it. And that's kind of, a bigger long-term reason why something like the releasing the Epstein files, we're just like, it's acceptable that they still haven't, that we still don't have those, and we don't listen to survivors in the way that we should. And that's a huge reason why I got just so passionate and connected to Rise Above Justice movement for the work that you all are doing. And because it really is at the root of all of this is the way that we both treat children, but the way that we treat people in this country when it comes to like sexual violence and it's almost like we've just made it so acceptable in this country and especially when it's a white man or a white person doing it, it just has this less of this effect of being violent that they can just not address it like it should be. And so yeah, I'll stop there to just kind of pass it over to you if you have any questions. But yeah, I will say that's kind of the broader version of what I would like people to try to educate them on is that, not everyone grows up, most people do not grow up in the same environment. And if you're thinking about, a child's equal right to be able to like make it in this country, right? Be able to go to school or get an education or go to higher education or get a certain job, if you are already limiting a child at birth, how are they supposed to make it, right? How is that equal by any means? And so taking things away like SNAP benefits and access to healthcare and like for me, I think about healthcare. I didn't have any healthcare until I was like my first job. And I think about that a lot. Like me and my siblings never were able to go to the doctor or hospital and so much of that is also around the ideas that MAGA white Christian nationalism are very like anti healthcare, anti being able to get vaccinated and be able to have regular checkups, things that are just basic rights. And children are not, so many children in this country do not have that access. So, I want people to understand that, yeah, you might be talking about, oh, everyone has an equal opportunity. Everyone does not have an equal opportunity, not in this country. And it's very blatant, it's very obvious. And, after living outside of the US for a long time, after, having things like NHS in Europe, like I was able to see like, wow, this is possible. Like this is we're able to like a country can actually like provide for its citizens in a way that doesn't take everything out of their savings and their life. So yeah, I will say that's a lot of what I think about initially when it comes to just wanting people to be more educated around just yeah, the rights of children in this country, if you really think about it.
Yeah, I think you bring up a lot of key points, that hit hard for a lot of people. And I've been sitting here listening to everything that you're saying, and it's resonating very deeply with me. But I know that we got to continue fighting. We got to continue pushing back against the patriarchy, the oligarchy. the billionaires, the fascists. We got a lot of work to do, my friend, but
Yeah.
at least we're not doing it by ourselves. There's a whole coalition of people that are doing it and fighting for people like you, fighting for people like me, fighting for people like my mom. Part of the reason why I created this movement was to amplify the voices that don't reach the headlines and the stories that don't reach the headlines. And I'm doing exactly that by doing this podcast, sitting down talking to people that are just everyday people and just doing some incredible work in their local communities or trying to find out where their loved one is that they haven't seen in 35 years and amplifying the voices of survivors, amplifying the voices of organizers and organizations that are on the ground doing things every single day to fight back against oppression in all forms. Uh, so with that being said, is there anything else that you wanted to share with the listeners today?
Yeah, definitely. I think one thing that would maybe help like wrap up kind of how I went from that childhood I talked about to where I am now.
Mhm.
I think it's important for people to like understand the path of how to make choices in life that get you to where maybe you want to be, but also just how to get it out of that kind of environment when you don't have anything, when you are poor and are trying to make it. And so something that will say that education is like the reason I am where I am today. The fact that I was able to, I barely finished high school. I was living in a very abusive and traumatic household. So it was very hard to focus on school at the same time as dealing with all of that. But I was able to use things like being in track and field to keep me grounded and in a lot of ways, my coach was another reason why I am where I am today. And so much of my background and upbringing, I, in a lot of ways, was raised by the love and support of Black, Brown, and Indigenous communities as, a white person in this country with all of the privileges that I had, I was still very much supported. And that's something that, I think about a lot too of I think about poverty a lot. I think about, my parents always feeling like they deserved so much than they had, and maybe didn't work hard to be able to make it, but just, had so much blame on everyone else around them. I don't see that when I have, worked with and lived with, a lot of Black and Brown communities ever since I was a kid because I just saw so much love. I saw so much, being able to be like, even if like I was just talking with my with someone even this past weekend, and we were talking about her kids and the idea is that even if, she has to go hungry, she would still, feed her kids. That was not how my upbringing was. That is not how my parents were. And so I really saw that it was possible to, be also maybe a parent that really cares enough for their children to be able to try to get them out of that environment, or not even out, but just be able to help them get into being able to get an education and be able to get a stable job. And I think too, my none of my family encouraged me to go to college. They actually discouraged it, and very obvious reasons with everything going on. We see why that is. And, I was so grateful to be able to go to, undergrad at San Francisco State University. And I will say, in so many ways, that city molded me and my organizing even more. And, I was able to then get into a lot of the issues that I was passionate about from there. So, going into college, I didn't have the full understanding of a lot of this work, but going in and getting in, my undergrad in international relations, focusing on ethnic studies and gender studies, I was able to kind of just dive into a lot of this work at a deeper level. And I think that's where a lot of my activism grew. Being able to get my master's in London outside of the United States. So I was able to see from an outside perspective of the US, how our systems work and how they operate, how they also affect other countries. And, it's crazy now, being 2025. Back in 2020, I did my thesis on Black Palestinian transnational solidarity in the fight against white supremacy and state violence. And my case studies were actually the US and Palestine. And so I think a lot about of, the ideas around understanding social movements, transnational solidarity, like we said, how we're seeing that happen more digitally. When October 7th hit in 2023, there was so much fear. There was so much fear because I understood and knew about, the issues going on for many, many years far, far before October 7th. And I knew I was scared. I was scared because I knew that not enough people in this country understood about Palestine, where it even was, the legacies of genocide there. So I was really worried because I feel like there was such a lack of understanding, but also such a negative understanding of just, I think, global politics in general in this country. And so, being able to then also work at an organization, outside of the US that supported Afghan refugees during a time when the US pulled out in 2021. That was also a time where I just saw the continued violence of this country on other countries. And it just, continued to show me that there was so much that needed to be uh, basically, revealed to a lot of people in the United States. I think there's a lack of just not only understanding, but also resources to know what's going on outside of our own country, how we are impacting and affecting other countries. And I will say, since 2023, I've seen so many more people in this country have a understanding of that and rise against it and rise to be able to basically speak truth to power because that's what it is. So much of this country is about wanting to hide the truth. And, I came back to the States in 2022 and I was working at Amnesty International. And during that time, a huge focus on Palestine. And I'll just say it's interesting to now be here in 2025 and watching how the last couple years a lot of people have been able to kind of open their eyes and see a lot of what's happening in this country because of, in a lot of ways, digital access, and also getting to hear from those outside of the United States, getting to just have a broader understanding of what's happening. And it's horrible. It's horrible the last couple years, everything that's happened. But at the same time, there's such a beauty in the coalitions that have formed in the education that's happened across the country, across the world. And I think, like what you said earlier, there's always moments where you just feel like, as an organizer, like, yeah, like you said, we've both been doing this similar now, like similar length of time. And after 15 years in this work, there are always moments when you're like, why did I get into this work? It's just, it just continues to feel like things are getting worse even, and so much of what you fight for isn't necessarily going to be a right later on, maybe even a couple years later because of how our political system works. And yeah, I would just say that that's something I hope more people understand too, is that education is freedom. It's how we are able to, teach the next generation of what has happened, how to combat it. I think a lot about the 60s, and I think about, just the huge push for civil rights, but also, now where we are in 2025 and what has happened in between then. And yeah, just I think a huge part of that is being able to understand how we are able to convey the information that needs to get out there, especially at a time when there's just so many attacks on education, on access to education. And I get scared all the time. I think about kids now that maybe would grow up, that are growing up like how I did right now, and how they may not have access to things like FAFSA. Like I would have never gone to college if I didn't have access to those loans. And that's something I think about a lot too. Before that was an opportunity, I wouldn't have been able to make it to school. I wouldn't probably be where I am today. And so it's just, I think it's really important for us to always kind of keep that at the forefront, understand why there's so many attacks on our education system, is really, really critical. But I'll say, lastly, kind of going into some of the work I was talking about that we were doing at Free Speech for People, just biggest thing I'll say is get on our site, get on freespeechforpeople.org. If you're interested in any of this work, and just start reading, just start kind of trying to digest some of this information. Check out our socials. We're across social at Free Speech for People. And just, get involved because there's so many ways that you can be involved in these fights. When it comes to the impeachment and removal of Trump and other key officials, there's tons of work happening there. I will say, to give a brief overview of what you asked of kind of what the next steps are. Back in August, we were doing a lot of work around August recess and using that time to really educate the public and also to yeah, be able to like share what the actual impeachable offenses are so people have an understanding. But we have a huge strategy around focusing on the members of Congress that did not vote for impeachment. And so, I will say the strategic ideas around impeachment are that we know that we have to get at least 218 members of Congress to vote for impeachment for it to move. And to then get to removal. And we know that we only were able to get 79 in this past on June 25th on the first vote. But we also know that it's not about just one vote. This actually is, a process that takes time. Actually, Free Speech People actually worked on the first impeachment during Trump's first term, and so there's a lot that we have also learned about how to kind of operate on this campaign, but it's not just about us. Our legal lawyers are focused on the impeachable offenses, but our campaign team that I'm a part of as the digital organizing strategist really is focused on, how we were able to be as strategic as possible to actually make this happen. So it's really, about getting the word out as much as possible. We're very much involved in a lot of the forefront of, we've been endorsing all of the No Kings Days. We've been working with, like I said, a number of the grassroots organizations that are leading kind of the forefront right now of this work. But also something we want people to know is that it's not just about impeaching and removing Trump and other key officials. It's not. It's not. We know that. We know that this is a way bigger kind of project of work that we are doing on all different levels. And that's why we have many different campaigns. And so I'll say, one of the biggest reasons why I joined the organization was because of their work on abolishing super PACs. That is an area of work that I just have not see another organization really take on at this level. And so I just would love to see more people getting involved, in that campaign, in understanding how corporations like Amazon can use crazy amounts of money to have influence in politics. And we're just seeing that continue to this day. And being able to understand, what it takes to actually abolish ICE. Like, what does that actually mean? How do we actually do that? And being able to be in community while we do that. And so, I'll even say I was recently at Chance's tour in Chicago, and just getting to be around, other fans of his that also care about this issue, for instance, is something that I think we should think more about too, of how we coalition build even outside of organizing, and in activism spaces, right? And so, just would really love to get people more involved in these campaigns. So, I will say, you can find me at Jaxtivism on Instagram, but also you can find Free Speech for People across all platforms. And if you have any questions at all, that's what we were here for. And we really just want to get more people to one, know about what's happening, to know that these campaigns are happening, that we're all saying, release the Epstein files. I want people to understand that the Epstein Transparency Act is a thing. It's happening. I think a lot of us just want um, the kind of just the facts to be laid out for people for them to understand, because so much of what we're fighting against right now is misinformation, disinformation, and that is what this administration is thriving on right now, is being able to just say whatever they say, and people take it as truth. And we really want to focus on the fact that organizers and also legal experts right now, I think in a lot of ways are the um, the coalitions that can have a huge impact right now, because there are ways legally that we can fight this. There are a lot more actions than you can take than just going to a protest. Going to a protest is great, going to marches, but there's so much more that you can do outside of even signing petitions or getting involved in a campaign and really diving into it. I will say all of us can't do everything, but all of us can do something. And so getting involved in like one campaign or one issue that you're passionate about, but deeply, deeply getting involved and finding ways to basically combat what we're up against right now. But I will say I feel like I've had an crazy amount of just I think recently just a lot of hope around, not only like organizers that I'm seeing making moves and making change, but also organizations like yours that are just growing and that are, being able to listen to your podcast in the morning if I have a hard day or I'm feeling like, I can't do it anymore. Being able to be involved with organizers, like you said, on a personal level, it makes this work doable as much as possible right now. But yeah, it also keeps me just in the fight, and so much of that right now is also community building. So I just, I will end with just saying that I think right now something we can all really focus on is, at the very least, is making sure that you have, a strong community that you are focused on supporting, if that's through mutual aid, if that's through, just being able to be a person that is there if anything were to happen. We're obviously seeing, just so much illegal arrests and attacks right now across the country, especially in some big cities like Chicago and LA and Portland and New York. And we really just want people to be educated enough to be able to find the issue that they can get on board, they can work on, and to not stop. I think that's one thing about, at least for me, fighting white supremacy is not a one-time thing. It is not a one campaign or one issue. It's not a one-time action. It really is, about making long-term changes in your life. And that's something else that, I hope people will understand too, is that you can make tangible change. You can boycott, you can do things in your own life that are going to make change outside of just a march. So yeah, I just want people to know there's so many ways to take action. But I also just want to thank you so much for allowing me to be on today, and just being able to be a part of this movement has also really honestly gotten me through many, many difficult times over this past couple years, and just grateful for the coalition, the support, and yeah, just continuing to fight for a better America. And, if we can ever get there. But for me, I really do believe that change is coming. I really do believe that. And I think it just takes, all of us doing, each of us doing something and doing it, and not, being consistent with it. I think that's something else that even as an organizer myself, I struggle with. Like, I think we all need to understand that, this is a long-term fight, and revolution is not a one-time act. It is, we have to be consistent and, continuing to push for change. And that's kind of how I see also the legacies of so many other organizers and activists from many, many years, over many, many years, who have, inspired me and inspired others. I think that's what we're doing. We're really just trying to push the needle for the next generation. And I always look at, I'm always thinking of Gen Z when I'm thinking about wanting to do what I do, to speak up when I speak up, is just try to make it a little bit easier for them to get in the door, a little bit easier for them to push for change as the years go on, because it's not about one of us. It's not about any one of us. It really is about building power as a movement, which extends beyond just in movements here in the United States, but global movements. And I hope people have seen that over the last couple years. And yeah, that's a lot of the reasons that I hold on to hope. But yeah, just again, really, really grateful to have me here. And yeah, if there's anything else, please let me know. I'd love to share.
Absolutely. You have an open invite anytime you want to be on the podcast, anytime you have anything you want to talk about, anytime you guys have a call to action. You can also collaborate with us. And, with that, again, thank you so much for coming on the podcast today. You take care of yourself, and I'll talk to you very soon. Okay.
Sounds great. Thanks so much. Talk soon.
Absolutely. Thank you.